Hi again. Today I want to talk about love bombing and my thoughts on love bombing. You might have heard me say this before. I am not a huge fan of labels in love. The whole love bombing, narcissism, avoidant attachment styles, all those things. I find sometimes they can be a little bit of a slippery slope and it has some downsides to it, right? So sometimes we can really attach to these labels and it keeps us as victims and disempowered in our love lives. And on the other end of the spectrum, or another downside, I would say to that, is also that sometimes it prevents us from seeing the different types of skills in relationships and in communication that we could be enhancing, that maybe we're not really looking at because we've labeled the situation, right? Or we've labeled the person. So today I really want to talk about love bombing. This is actually a term. I was doing some research and looking it up, and it's a term that was actually coined back in the 1970s, and it had to do with cults. So I kind of don't like the idea that we took a word from kind of that area and brought it into romantic relationships and a romantic vocabulary. But that's a whole other thing. Today, I want to talk about love bombing in the context of marriage and relationships, and also in the context of dating. So no matter where you are in terms of your relationship status, this is going to apply to you. So you'll want to listen in. I'm going to share some really valuable insights on this. So in terms of definitions, so it can be just big lavish gifts at the beginning of the relationship, big demonstrations of affection. It could also be, if it's the beginning of the relationship, really talking about the future really quickly. But then the thing is with love bombing is that, because those things are wonderful, right? When you love to be in a relationship like that, I think of my relationship with my husband, and the beginning of our relationship was totally fit that definition, right? But the important part of the definition is the intent behind those things. So it's when those things are done by one of the people in the relationship with some sort of malicious intent behind it, right? At the beginning, it's all beautiful, and then later on, when day-to-day life starts, things get more, it can lead to emotional abuse, or it can be very manipulative. So that's the flip side of it, and that's where the love bombing becomes not so good, right? Not something that you want in your relationship. So the thing is, it's always a question of, and this is where things can get tricky. It's all, oftentimes it can be all about perception too, right? What is the definition of over the top for you, right? It can be different to different people. Like I said, my relationship, we moved really quickly. It was these big demonstrations of affection right at the beginning of our relationship. And then we did, I think it was 2 weeks in, we had rented an apartment to move in together. So we did things really quick, but look at us, 10 years later, we're still going strong. We're still going stronger than ever. And when you listen to my story, right, it started off really strong, and then it started going down. So if I was just going by that definition of love bombing, it would have been easy for me to say, oh wow, look, at the beginning it was all rosy and nice and he was doing all these things, and then later on, all of a sudden he's distancing himself and things aren't, we weren't having as many date nights. That could technically fall under the definition of love bombing. But I know for myself, and as I've shared many times before, what I realized is I didn't have the skills and the tools to maintain that healthy, happy relationship, right? It's when I took ownership of my role. And I'm not saying that there's no such thing as love bombing, and there are no relationships where truly at the beginning it's a lavish expression of love, and then it goes toxic, and that never happens, right? And it's our fault because we don't have skills. What I'm saying, there are people out there who are buttholes. There are just men out there who are like that, and women too, right? In fairness, all of us, human beings, right? But where it gets kind of tricky, like I was saying, is when you use it kind of and without really looking at what was going on, really diving deeper. And two of the things I want to share in this video, two of the important points I wanted to get across to help you in this situation. Number one is I want to open your perspective about a theory out there, you might have heard it before, of how men and women approach relationships. And this might help you in the context of love bombing, and to really help you in terms of really encourage you to really look at your level of relationship skills, how much you understand of men in general, and what a partner is looking for in a relationship. So it's been said that men, when they meet a woman, they tend to go really fast, and then evaluate the relationship a bit later. And obviously I'm generalizing here, right? Like every person is different. Whereas women, when we enter into a relationship, we take our time and evaluate before jumping all in, right? Like, have you ever noticed, like, a lot of times men are going to be like a lot quicker to just want to get really, advanced or intimate with you, and women, it takes more time for us to warm up, generally speaking, right? Like I'm saying. So this is where oftentimes there can be that perception that there's love bombing, right? If the guy right away, he's all into you and he's doing all these things, and then over time, you notice that's starting to disappear. Could be love bombing. Could also be that that's kind of the way men operate, generally speaking, right? But when you know this, you can really discover if it is love bombing, or if it's, again, areas where you can really improve your communication relationship skills, right? Is there something that he's realizing a need that he's not getting met? Is there frustration? Maybe he doesn't know from his own traumas kind of how to express himself, and neither do you from your old traumas either, right? And there's a disconnect there. Do you understand how comfortable are you with the principles of feminine energy and magnetism and attraction, right? If you feel a little bit shaky in these areas, it could be creating an environment or a dynamic in the relationship where, this kind of stuff is happening, where in the beginning, everything seems great. And then, weeks or months or maybe even years down the line, it just all disappears, right? That honeymoon phase is over, right? Like they said, and things start getting, bad, let's just say, right? Or not as good. So that is going to be one area to really look at, right? You really want to be strong to really understand if you are finding yourself in situations where you're always being love bombed, or things change really quickly. I really encourage you to look at what have you done, right, to this point to really kind of understand the dynamic in the relationships. And obviously, sometimes this is going to be easier in certain relationships than others. You'll meet someone and it's just going to flow naturally. And other times it's going to be a bit more difficult. But when you use the tools that work, and to really understand what's going on in the other person's mind, their brains, what their needs are, what their values are, it's going to be so much easier for you to navigate all of this. So this is that was more from the perspective of a new relationship, or when you're dating, or when you're, not maybe in a fully committed relationship or a marriage yet. So when it comes to a marriage, of course, you can find yourself in that situation too, where everything was great in the beginning, you're married, years go by, and things start getting rockier, and there are more ups and downs. But I love talking about love bombing in the positive context in my relationship. Like I share that I love bomb my husband all the time. Obviously, there is not that malicious intent that I was talking about in the beginning, but I love doing lavish gestures every now and then to show him how much I care, right? Like when you've been married in a relationship a long time, maybe this is when you can start taking your partner for granted. And even if you're not intentionally doing that, if it's not conscious, like a lot of times also you're going to want to have a really good, happy relationship. You're going to want to put money in the love bank, as they say, right? You're going to want to make your partner feel special out of the blue. Just drop a bomb on him of how awesome he is, how you appreciate him, how handsome he is, how much you love him. Like every now and then, I feel like most of us don't do that often enough. It is something that since I've been more intentional about it, it has paid like huge dividends in a relationship, because there's always a foundation of love there. There's always a reminder that the other person is special to you. So like I said, I love using love bombing as a positive tool in the relationship. And obviously sometimes, even in the relationship when you've been together a long time, right? It may seem like you'll like maybe your partner will love bomb you, and then not a few hours, maybe a couple days later, like the mood totally changes, and it can feel like you're in this situation where there's love bombing happening. But again, this is an area where I really encourage you to look at the dynamics and the skills that are being used, and how intentional you're being with your words, or your listening, or your magnetism, right? Because it can even happen over time in a marriage. And I don't want you to perceive necessarily and miss out, right, by thinking that everything that, you know, 1 minute if it's great, then another minute it's not. It's because it's truly malicious or there's no positive intent at all, right? Sometimes there can be a positive intent behind it, but then things go wrong because the person is triggered or is holding on to resentment or is not getting a need met, and they're trying to, you know, trying to make things better, then it's not working, and there could be frustration. So that's something to really look at. And obviously, everything I say in this video can be flipped the other way around too, right? So oftentimes I get flack from people because they're like, hey, it sounds, you know, like, you know, it's not just men, right? Or it's not just women, right? But I tend to speak to women out here, but obviously everything can be flipped the other way. So my advice to you, like any label, is always to really look into it. Really, you can take it as information. It's great information. It's a great reference point to have a label for something, but to really pay attention and to really dig in deep to see if that's really that label, what's happening, right? And not to just slap on a label on anything and everything when things get too hard. And I'm not telling you to tolerate anything, right? But I'm inviting you to really be curious about the label and be very intentional and really reflect back on your own actions and what you can control and how you show up in order to be able to determine what's going on there. Because I've said this before in my videos where, you know, in my own relationship, we struggled for a long time. I could have easily, you know, called my man a narcissist and walked out the door. I could easily say, you know, our relationship was a whole example of love bombing because it was great at first, and then it was really difficult for a period of time, and I could have walked out the door, and, you know, I probably would have really regretted that, right? So obviously when there's situations of the 3 A's or it's very, you know, there's a really big, obvious issue there, this might not apply so much, and I think you know what I'm talking about. But in other circumstances where it just seems like the other person is shut down or really all of a sudden distancing themselves or like having kind of anger or a lot of sarcasm, and just anger, I mean like frustration, maybe a bit of contempt, to really explore the dynamic before you just slap a label on that and pack your bags and walk out the door. So I hope this was interesting. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you have any ideas on other videos, I would love to hear them, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks so much, and bye for now.